Few works in literature manage to capture the complexity of the human mind quite like Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky didn't just write a crime novel, he crafted a profound exploration of morality, guilt, and redemption. Its impact isn't merely in the plot, but in the way it lays bare the protagonist's inner conflicts, turning the reader into a silent accomplice to his choices. Imagine reading a book and feeling with every page as if you were staring into a mirror, challenged to confront your own conscience. That's the experience Dostoevsky delivers. He doesn't offer easy answers, but instead constructs a reflection that lingers far beyond the final page. The brilliance of the author goes beyond the storyline. It lies in the psychological depth of his characters. Dostoevsky wrote from real pain, as his own life was marked by hardship. A death sentence, commuted at the last moment, epileptic seizures, and financial struggles. This suffering seeps into his works, giving them weight and authenticity. Crime and Punishment isn't just a story about crime and its consequences. It's an intense study of the human psyche, an invitation to explore the limits of conscience. Dostoevsky understood, perhaps better than anyone, that true judgment doesn't come from external laws, but from the internal tribunal each person carries within. The structure of the novel defies traditional storytelling. It doesn't follow a straight path from guilt to punishment. Instead, it unfolds in layers, alternating between moments of extreme tension and deep introspection. For readers accustomed to straightforward narratives, this style might seem challenging, but that's precisely the point. Dostoevsky places the reader inside the protagonist's mind, making them feel every dilemma, every hesitation, as if they themselves were trapped in his thoughts. The impact of Crime and Punishment extends far beyond Russian literature. Its influence reaches fields like psychology and philosophy, remaining relevant to this day. After all, who hasn't tried to justify a mistake to themselves, seeking relief from the weight of guilt? The human mind is skilled at finding ways to escape accountability, but how far can that escape really go? The profile of Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov is a sharp-minded young student with empty pockets. The misery of his existence is suffocating, and each day he convinces himself that his intelligence should guarantee him a grand destiny. Yet reality does not align with his expectations. He watches mediocre men succeed while he, brilliant and full of potential, can barely afford the rent for his tiny room in St. Petersburg. This frustration turns into resentment and, gradually, into arrogance. He begins to believe there is a fundamental division between ordinary people and those destined for greatness. In his view, a select few superior minds have the right to transcend moral and social rules. His pride is not only intellectual, but also moral. He despises those who accept their place in society and convinces himself that certain extraordinary individuals have the right to make drastic decisions for the greater good. This idea doesn't emerge out of nowhere. He reads philosophical articles, reflects on Napoleon Bonaparte, and concludes that if a great man must commit a crime to achieve his purpose, then that crime is not only justifiable, but necessary. But for him, this isn't just an abstract theory. It's a principle he intends to test in practice. And when the opportunity arises, he decides to prove his own superiority. The complexity of this young man lies in his inner contradiction. He sees himself as above conventional morality, yet he is plagued by deep unease. He is torn between his belief that he can become a superman and the shadow of doubt that haunts him. At times he appears cold and calculating. At others, he is overwhelmed by panic. He wants to believe he can act without guilt, but his mind resists. This psychological tension makes him one of the most fascinating characters in literature. Dostoevsky does not create a classic hero or a caricatured villain. Raskolnikov embodies both the human potential for greatness and its tendency towards self-destruction. He forces us to reflect on how far ambition can take us when we start justifying questionable actions in the name of an ideal. How often do people rationalize dubious choices with the excuse that the end justifies the means? This is the trap Raskolnikov falls into, and once he crosses that line, he realizes there is no way back. The theory of the Superman and the crime. For many, life follows a rigid script, rules to be followed, limits to be respected. But some historical figures change the course of the world by defying conventions and imposing their own will. Inspired by this idea, the character begins to see himself as someone above common norms. He believes that certain extraordinary individuals have the right to break moral barriers in the name of a greater purpose. This conviction doesn't appear overnight. It takes root in his mind until a decisive act becomes inevitable. His reasoning follows a dangerous logic. If there are those who shape the destiny of humanity, and there are those who merely follow orders, he must prove which group he belongs to. To do this, he chooses a target, someone who, in his judgment, contributes nothing to the world, merely taking advantage of the weaker. The crime is not a momentary impulse, but the result of a meticulous plan. He believes he has complete control over the situation. However, there is a great difference between theory and practice, and that difference reveals itself in the decisive moment. When he finally acts, he discovers something he had never considered. His mind does not respond as he imagined. He thought he was above fear and regret, but as soon as the act is carried out, uncontrollable forces awaken within him. The serenity he planned gives way to a growing unease. The thoughts, once logical, become chaotic. Small details, which seemed under control, now transform into unexpected threats. Reality slips from his grasp, proving that, no matter how well constructed something is, there are always unpredictable factors. And this is where the true dilemma begins. The challenge is not just in the crime, but in what follows. The mind, which once seemed like an ally, now turns against him. What was a cold, rational theory dissolves into a whirlwind of uncontrolled emotions. Do those who are above the rules really exist? Or does everyone, at some point, become a prisoner of their own conscience? The crime and its consequences. What should have been the ultimate proof of his superiority turns into a nightmare. Raskolnikov believed that, with intelligence and planning, he could carry out his theory without being shaken. But reality asserts itself in a brutal way. The moment everything happens, logic gives way to chaos. Details that seemed under control slip through his fingers. And the unexpected arrival of the victim's sister makes everything even more desperate. What was meant to be a carefully calculated act unravels in the face of the unpredictability of the real world, revealing the fragility of his conviction. From that moment on, his life will never be the same. He flees in a panic, convinced that he can simply move on. But something inside him has already changed. The streets of St. Petersburg, once just a backdrop to his routine, now feel suffocating. Every glance in the crowd carries weight. Every sound seems like a threat. His mind, which once operated with surgical precision, now fragments into paranoia and confusion. Small noises, casual encounters, and innocent questions become sources of anxiety. Escaping the law might be possible, but escaping from oneself is another story. In the days that follow, the weight of the crime begins to affect him physically. Fever, delirium, reality blurring with hallucinations. He no longer knows if he is being followed or if his mind is simply playing tricks on him. He avoids going out, avoids contact, but at the same time feels an irrational need to test his own limits, as if challenging fate. He convinces himself that no one can prove anything against him. But ironically, his own behavior becomes his greatest enemy. Every thoughtless gesture raises suspicions. Every word spoken carries risk. The unshakable theory that supported his decision now becomes his prison. What was once merely a philosophical concept turns into a silent sentence. His internal torment intensifies with each passing day. The city, which once seemed indifferent, now appears full of invisible traps. His attempt to fit the profile of a superior man slowly crumbles, and his mind begins to betray him in ways he never could have predicted. Is there still a way to reverse this situation, or is the worst only just beginning? The psychological punishment. The protagonist's greatest punishment doesn't come from the law, but from his own mind. He believed he could carry the weight of his decision without hesitation, but gradually he discovers that his conscience cannot be silenced. Guilt and justification engage in a fierce battle, making his days and nights unbearable. He oscillates between complete coldness and uncontrollable bouts of anguish. There is no rest, no relief. He tries to rationalize what he's done, repeating to himself that he had sufficient reasons, but his body betrays him. Fever, tremors, insomnia. As if his own physiology rejects the idea that he can move on without consequences. His own name carries the destiny that now consumes him. Raskolnikov means divided, fragmented, and that's exactly how he feels. His mind is a battleground where two opposing forces face off. On one side, the belief that he belongs to the class of great men, those who transcend moral barriers without hesitation. On the other, the weight of humanity still resisting within him. His pride prevents him from admitting the mistake, but his conscience gives him no peace. He was once an ambitious young man, dreaming of a brilliant future. Now, he is a prisoner of his own thoughts. Isolation becomes inevitable. Every social interaction is a risk. He avoids those who might see through his facade, but, ironically, he feels an inexplicable need to confess. A cruel paradox. While he wants to hide what he's done, he also feels an almost desperate urge to be confronted, as if testing his own limits. His paranoia grows. His behavior becomes erratic. The streets of St. Petersburg, once just a background, now oppress him. Every unfamiliar face seems to carry a silent judgment. He no longer knows if he is protecting himself or if, deep down, he wants to be discovered. The psychological torment asserts itself on its own. There are no cells, no chains, but his freedom is nothing but an illusion. Each attempt to justify what he has done only deepens the wound. The line between reality and delirium becomes blurrier with each passing day. But when the mind can no longer find exits, what will be the next step? Characters and relationships. No great transformation happens in a vacuum. Throughout the story, the young man is confronted by characters who play crucial roles in his journey. Each represents an aspect of his psyche, a reflection of his anxieties, or a challenge to his distorted logic. His mother and sister carry the hope for a worthy future for him, in contrast to the abyss he's falling into. Sonia, in turn, embodies redemption, not through moralistic speeches, but by offering a path that requires humility and acceptance. The presence of these characters not only enriches the narrative, but also intensifies the protagonist's internal conflict. Among those who cross his path, Judge Porfiry Petrovich stands out as a relentless adversary. He doesn't need concrete proof to see the truth. His psychological approach is subtle and strategic, pressing Raskolnikov almost imperceptibly. Each encounter between them turns into a mental chess game, where one tries to hide while the other dismantles, piece by piece, his resistance. What makes this relationship even more intriguing is Porfiry's lack of haste. He knows that the human mind can be its own worst enemy, and he uses this certainty as his greatest weapon. The protagonist's interpersonal relationships are not mere accessories to the plot, but a reflection of the duality that consumes him. On one side, those who represent his humanity; on the other, figures who reinforce his belief in the superiority of some over the masses. Every dialogue, every encounter, acts as a trial for his convictions. Even when he tries to distance himself, the presence of these people haunts him, constantly reminding him of the weight of his choices. Each character, in their own way, serves as a mirror, reflecting aspects Raskolnikov tries to ignore. Some try to rescue him, others challenge his worldview, but all play an essential role in the growing tension that unfolds. The story advances not only through events, but through the impact these figures have on him. The dualism of the book, crime and punishment, escapes rigid classifications. It blends detective fiction, psychological thriller, and philosophy, creating a narrative that not only grips the reader, but also challenges them to reflect on the human condition. This fusion of styles allows the work to function on multiple levels. On one hand, the mounting tension of an investigation; on the other, a deep dive into the disturbed mind of the protagonist. More than an action and mystery plot, Dostoevsky constructs a profound study of Raskolnikov's internal torments. Beyond exploring guilt and regret on an individual level, the book also offers a scathing critique of 19th century Russian society. St. Petersburg emerges as a setting of brutal contrasts, where misery and opulence coexist chaotically. Social inequality is not merely a backdrop, but an element that directly shapes the character's decisions. The protagonist's extreme poverty is not a peripheral detail. It explains part of his mentality and the justifications he finds for his actions. Dostoevsky is not merely narrating the psychological collapse of a man, but revealing a system that drives many to despair. The balance between arguments and counter-arguments is one of the great merits of the work. Dostoevsky doesn't impose definitive answers or deliver moralistic speeches. He presents different perspectives and leaves the dilemma of interpreting the limits of ethics and ambition up to the reader. Is Raskolnikov a product of the environment he lives in, or a man who consciously chose his path? Is guilt inevitable, or does it depend on each individual's psychological makeup? The absence of closed conclusions transforms the book into an open field for reflection, where each reader can see something different depending on their worldview. The duality present in the work is what makes it timeless. It is not just the story of a crime and its punishment, but a profound portrait of human contradictions. Dostoevsky doesn't offer a simple answer to the conflict between right and wrong. He invites us to face the inner chaos of those torn between these two forces. The ending. The protagonist's fate is sealed not only by the investigation, but by the unbearable weight of his own mind. Throughout the narrative, he tries to convince himself that he can bear the consequences of his choice. But reality pushes him toward an inevitable conclusion. The confession doesn't arise from a momentary impulse, but from gradual psychological wear. His pride prevented him from admitting weakness, but the torment becomes unbearable. When he finally surrenders, it is not an act of full repentance, but a surrender in the face of overwhelming pressure. The sentence leads him to Siberia, but his physical exile only reflects the internal exile in which he already lived. The surrounding environment changes, but the conflict remains. He does not see his sentence as redemption, as he still resists the idea that he has been defeated. His mind refuses to accept guilt completely, and this denial prevents any genuine transformation. He continues to cling to the illusion of being extraordinary, even when reality has already proven otherwise. The arrogance that supported his actions does not disappear suddenly. It persists, fueling his internal struggle. Dostoevsky constructs an ending that rejects the cliché of immediate redemption. There is no moment of epiphany where everything resolves clearly. What remains is a fragmented man, faced with a long road still ahead. The real punishment is not just the sentence imposed by the state, but the burden he carries within himself. He may be physically distant, but his mind remains imprisoned by what he has done. The ending of Crime and Punishment does not provide easy answers, as the work never set out to do so. Its impact lies precisely in what is left unsaid, in what remains open. Dostoevsky does not offer a definitive conclusion, but a door slightly ajar to an uncertain future. The role of St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is not just a backdrop, but an extension of Raskolnikov's mental state. Its narrow, stuffy, and dirty streets reflect the psychological weight he carries. The suffocating heat and the oppressive crowd amplify his anguish, making any attempt at internal escape impossible. He wanders through the city as if trapped in a maze with no way out, where every dark alley and every unfamiliar gaze seem to push him further. The city, much like his mind, is chaotic, stifling, and full of contrasts. Dostoevsky uses the geography of St. Petersburg to highlight the brutal class division. The opulence of the elite salons is far removed from the filthy tenements where misery piles up. Inequality is not just a backdrop, it's an element that directly influences Raskolnikov's perception. He feels this disparity like an open wound and believes his act challenged this unjust structure. But the city doesn't care about his justifications. It continues at its indifferent pace, oblivious to the fate of any individual. Each location carries symbolic meaning. His cramped room functions as a prison, both physical and mental. The bustling streets constantly remind him that he is being watched. Encounters with Porfiry Petrovich and Sonia take place in spaces that intensify the tension, as if the very environment were conspiring to destabilize him. St. Petersburg doesn't just compose the setting of the narrative, it becomes an active force, mirroring the protagonist's emotional turbulence. The relationship between Raskolnikov and the city reveals that he has never truly been alone. The dirty walls, narrow corridors, and incessant noise contribute to his growing paranoia and isolation. The city neither judges nor absolves him. It simply exists, unchanging, indifferent to what happens inside him. Crime and Punishment shows us that no justification erases the consequences of a choice. Raskolnikov tried to prove that he was above common morality, but he discovered that the true prison is not around him, but within his own mind. The true weight of decisions doesn't lie solely in the external world, but in what we carry internally.